Even before cycling for a club, I wanted my body to dance on the pedals like Bernard Hinault as I'd cycle up a mountain pass. He was my role model.
Hinault cycled like Merckx today, accelerating at incredible speed.
When he got up at Alpe d'Huez hand in hand with Greg LeMond, I wanted to share that moment and have a moment like that of my own.
Bernard sure looks happy. He looks really happy.
He's a real champion. He doesn't race for the crowd. He isn't a nonconformist or a rebel. He's just himself. If he feels like saying go to hell, he'll say it.
He has a 9-minute lead now, though it was 10 minutes a little while ago, but he's on his way to the finish line. 80 kilometers to go.
When you see that list of achievements, I'd take them right away if they were mine. He's incredible.
The French world champion, 18 years after Jens Stablinski, and the yellow, green, red, and the tricolour of the French champion. Here's the rainbow jersey wrapped around Bernard Hinault's shoulders. He certainly deserves it.
He was just the boss, not just the best rider in the peloton, not just a super champion. He was the boss.
Finiac in Brittany, next to Saint-Brieuc. Bernard Hinault was born and grew up here. This is the story of the last Frenchman to win the Tour de France 30 years ago.
I come here on my bike. Sometimes we walked up here because we didn't have a school bus back then. So 2.5 kilometers twice a day is 5 kilometers a day, and it got me fit. A bunch of us hung out together. 4 or 5 of us, sometimes more, 10 or 15. It was fun to cycle. I remember my cousin began cycling. I wanted to be like him, so I took up cycling too, and then I started racing. My father worked at the local train station. He worked very hard, so I knew the value of hard work. Every day, come rain or shine, in the heat or in a snowstorm, the trains were always available because it was too important for them not to run. I admired my parents back then and still do. My mother has passed away since. They were generous and did everything they could to make us happy. Did you encourage him when he started cycling?
Of course, I never stopped encouraging him. I wanted to encourage the other one too, but he wasn't motivated. He wasn't as persevering as this one, but I never stopped encouraging this one.
And did you mind washing his kit?
No, not at all. It was easy with a laundromat. I didn't have a washing machine at first, and they'd say, "You're lucky to have those jerseys," and I'd say, "Yep," and I hope you'll get somewhere to with them.
Well, this is my cadet bike, so it's pretty old now. I stumbled across it one day, and the person who had it said, well, take it, it's yours after all. And I said, no, it's yours now. And he said, no, take it. So I suppose I took it. It didn't take long for me to get it back. I won my first races on this bike. I had my brother's initials on it. HG for Gilbert Hinault. I remember I got my license on a Tuesday, and my first race was the following Sunday. It was on a circuit around Plongenoil. That was my first race, and I was cycling at the back. I was cycling behind everyone the whole time, just watching and learning. Then there was an opening, and I took it. There was Jean-Yves Olivier, who was the cycling champion at the time, the guy who won all the races practically every weekend. He knew how to race, and I learned from him.
You beat my brother, Jean-Yves.
Yeah, you're an Olivier, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm Jean-Yves' brother.
And where exactly was the finish line? Further down there?
Oh, it was 50 kilometers away. That young man over there with the bike, huh?
That one?
Yeah, that one. My brother's bike.
I thought it was better for me to join the race.
Bernard's first race, well, I gave him some advice like I would for everybody else, about being cautious and wise. Bernard was short-tempered, you know, and was easily drawn into fights, as they say, okay? Well, he took off with one of the competitors and beat him in the first sprint, a victory so soon. And after that, well, you can say he was on his way.
I grew up in the countryside, and because my parents lived in somewhere remote, my mother had a big yard. She had chickens running around and a lot of other animals. So we had to deal with all that before we could go out and play and cycle. But that was natural for me. Helping your parents out when you're 10 or 12 is the normal thing to do.
They started talking about him when he was a cycling youngster, really, a young terror. There was a reporter in Saint-Brieuc, a reporter from West France, who told me to go and check this guy out, a guy named Hinault from Saint-Brieuc. Well, I went to see the phenomenon since everybody was talking about him, and that's where I saw him win the Melron race.
At that time, I was racing as a cadet in Melron, and I started hearing the name Bernard Hinault getting talked about a lot. He'd already won 5 races, they said. I was interested. I wanted to learn out more. There was a descending false flat where the peloton was cycling. He easily got through that. I'd been riding for 3 years at the time. I knew we'd see him again because descending a false flat like that, the time the gear ratio was 50-16, we weren't allowed to use high development. I messed it up, and the next time I saw him, he was on the podium. No one's ever caught up with him since.
And sometime later, at 17 years of age, he won the French Youth Championship in Arras.
I remember I didn't go cycling that Sunday with Mr. Leroux because he said if you fall, you'll be out of the race. So that's what we did. He spotted the 2 bumps. He said position yourself on the first and attack on the second. But on the first day of the race, when he was standing on the side of the road, he saw I wasn't in the right position. I saw him bring his arms up to the sky. I can't believe it. He never listens, he was saying. So I decided to get out in front. And on the second hill in Pas-Hinault, I then attacked. Did he always listen to you?
Well, unfortunately not. He made enormous tactical errors, which never stopped him from winning. So it wasn't easy for him to learn how to ride. He was never aware of his mistakes, you see. I met Bernard Hinault before he went professional. He was a junior, 18 years of age. I just stopped cycling. I was starting a career as a journalist at the Voix du Nord and covering amateur cycling. And that Thursday of Ascension, they asked me to cover the Premier Pas Dunlop. The finals were in Arras on the Pas de Calais. The best juniors were there. Well, I didn't know them, just a few amongst them. Bernard Hinault. And the course, well, that was terrific. One obstacle, the hill, Pas en Artois. And believe it or not, the guy wasn't known as the Badger yet, but he was a promising French cyclist, attacking on his own. And he outdistanced them all, the best French cyclists. And he reached the finish line 60 kilometers further down with a minute's lead. I was certainly impressed. In fact, he impressed everyone. Everyone.
In 1973, he did his military service, so there was no cycling at all then. People tend to forget about you. He made a comeback in early 74. I remember the race was in Cesson, in Saint-Brieuc. He was riding there, still training. It was a Category 1 race. He was Category 3 for his comeback, but since he was local, I think he wanted to make the Category 1. They gave him a tour in the View. So there were comments he was getting recognised again. The 3-kilometre circuit, I didn't see much of him because I was running in the Cat 1 and he was in 3, but I'd hear about his victories. And later we were both racing the Route de France in May, so there we were on the Route de France and chatting away. I said, Bernard, where was your race last week? He said, well, on Sunday I was in Plumagua. And he said, I won. I did well. And he was only in the Category 3s. We still went to the Route de France. He was in Juaneda's team, and there, well, we discovered who the real Bernard Hinault was. In the space of just a month, He went from being one of the back markers in an ordinary race to the leader of the biggest amateur race in France. When I got home after the army, I didn't have the points I needed to be in a category, so I had to start at the lowest level. And by the end of the year, I had turned pro, because I won all of the races at all levels. I was selected at the end of the season for the Étoile des Espoirs, and that was the only race I ran with Équipe de France.
Stay with us. The story of Bernard Hinault continues. At 20 years of age, Bernard Hinault was exceptionally gifted. When he began his career, he never did anything like anybody else. For him, cycling was, and always will be, a game. More than a philosophy, it was an attitude, a way to express his artistic talent. Cycling unleashed the audacity within him.
Paul Tertre, one of the sponsors, had a hardware store, and so did Jean Stablinski, the former world champion. He was part of the same company and was the one who made him sign his first contract. When you sign this deal, you really don't know what lies ahead. The first thing you think is, okay, I'll start out like everybody else, maybe I'll be a team member. And after my first races, well, I was first in line. They told me that Merckx was there, and I thought, yeah, what? Merckx is a human being, so I wasn't intimidated.
His team partners called him the Badger, aggressive and smart. Young Bernard Hinault was headed for fame.
The seniors decided not to include him in the bonus pool, and Bernard Hinault seemed to be offended. So he decided to find bonuses away from the peloton. And from the first round, he attacked and got the bonus. He turned round and honked his horn, a nice moment of revenge. Second sprint, a second bump, and once again Bernard attacked and got his bonus and thumbed his nose at the opposition. Third hump, same game, he took the lead. As he said later, I was exhausted after the third round, but at least I got what I wanted. Merckx caught up and said, okay, son, you've done a good job, you're in.
My first memory of Bernard Hinault was on the criterium to Camor in Brittany. He said, come on, let's close the gap. So he closed the gap with me, and I have to admit, we did a pretty good job. Our legs were pretty strong.
Back in '75, he turned pro with the Gitane team with Jean Stablinski. And I recall we were in the Wevelgem Grand Prix in Belgium, coming through a fairground where he more or less did over 100 kilometers an hour before anyone could catch up. And right after we had the 4 days of Dunkirk, there at the beginning of that event, I went to see him and said, why did you make that raid over there in the fairground? He said, well, once I get going, I can't stop. And I said, yeah, but you were supposed to do the 4 days of Dunkirk right afterwards. We're just starting out here. Yeah, well, he said, I exploded it. So I saw him a few days later and I said, now wait a minute, if we look at things from the beginning of the year, you've done it all. What are you going to do now? That's when he said, I'll follow up with this race, the Dauphiné, and then I'll think about the Tour.
Hinault had a great reputation. I hadn't raced a lot with him. So I didn't know him very well, and we did the Dauphiné together. Well, I couldn't understand what everybody was raving about. The mountain stages were pretty long. I think it was in Briançon, the day before the finish. And I think he'd lost around 40 minutes. Well, I was shocked. Who was this guy? Why did he have such a great reputation? And the next day we left Vannes, and this guy started cycling as fast as he could, leading the peloton without attacking. I couldn't believe it. What was he up to? Did he want to upset everybody or what? What was going on? We were quite a long way away, as a matter of fact, so he couldn't see who the guy was. I could see Eddy Merckx. So who was this guy? Well, we had to wait until he slowed down to identify him. If he rode that fast, we'd never be able to catch up. And then I realized it was Bernard Hinault. He'd had an argument with his coach, Jean Stablinski, at the time because Jean wanted him to do the Tour de France and he didn't want to. So he rode the first two mountain stages behind, back, on purpose to show him he wasn't really game for it. But he still wanted to show us on that last day that he was there. Well, we saw him all right. His legs sure hurt. But, wow, I told him that he could have settled things directly with Stablinski. He didn't have to include us in that fight. That was 40 years ago, you know.
Well, Jean said you'll do the Midi Libre, the Tour de l'Aude, and you'll do the first 8 days of the Tour de France to create some havoc. And I said, never. If I go, I'll do the whole race. And things got pretty steamy between us. There was a row, and from that day on, I decided to stop working with him.
He wasn't going to do well with Stablinski. Stablinski thought he was a good rider, but he wanted to use him at all fronts. He was about to leave Gitane when Cyril Guimard caught him and said, what if I become your sports director? Will you come? Will you stay?
I was contacted by Gitane, so I called Bernard and said, listen, they've appointed me. I'm the sport director now. You still want to leave? And he looked at me and said, really? You're the sport director? I said, yeah. I'm out of the race. You're not cycling anymore? Okay, well, if you're the sports director, I'll stay.
He knew Guimard, he knew Cyril liked modern methods, new strategies, so he wanted to learn from Guimard.
I had contacts at Mercier, and Cyril came to see me. He said, if I take over Gitane Renault, I mean Gitane, since it wasn't with Renault yet, will you stay? And I said, I'll stay if it's you, I'll leave if it's Stablinski. And that really was the beginning of a beautiful story. We were building a long-term project, starting with Renault on biomechanics, ergonomics, aerodynamics. We were lucky. We were invited to use the wind tunnels for testing. We noticed that I didn't have the best riding position. Training techniques really were just starting out in those days. Nutritional training began back then too. I think bicycle techniques, the first carbon bikes, all of this was just beginning then, developed during my generation. We developed medical follow-ups too. Dr. Maigret joined us on the project, so it was totally different from what other teams were doing in those days.
They were evaluated on a physiological level, if you like, and I was their traumatologist. We had an ergonomist, a blower, so yes, we had a really impressive medical organization, unique in the world of cycling. I was the first team doctor.
Padgett never admitted that he was as good as he was, which was ironic, really. He wanted us, his team members, to think he was clever. That got on my nerves because we'd always have to agree with him since he was the boss, but he was always ahead of us. When he'd say, do you get it? Like this? We couldn't do it because the team was riding on the Tour de France towards Angers and he wasn't happy about it. He would stand alone at the side of the road and make his feelings known. So they were 8 or 9 touring, trying to break up the mess, as they say. He caught up on the other side of the road with the cycling bag, said a few nice words of encouragement to show that he had the legs to climb and yell at them. That sums it up, really. You don't only need the guts to do it, you need the physical strength too. It's impossible, really, under normal conditions.
He was outstanding. He was above 90 milliliters of oxygen per minute per kilo. A usual pro was around about 80, so his energetic potential was 10 or 15% above the others. He had a huge physical and biochemical potential and enjoyed bragging about it all the time. His femurs were longer than average, which is true, so his leverage was enormous. And with Bernardino's mind, well, the combination of these physical and psychological qualities created a real phenomenon. So the young talent was on his way. The Gant-Wevelgem, the Liège-Bastogne-Liège, the Dauphiné, bastions collapsed like dominoes. And the Tour de France champion was on his way. In 1977, Bernard Teneve won his second Tour. and they were disappointed by young Bernard Hinault's absence. His love story with the July crowd began 1 year later in 1978.
One of the directors at Renault found out that I was getting rid of Van Impe, the 1976 Tour winner. He came over and said, "Mr. Guimard, why are you getting rid of Van Impe? He's just won the Tour. Next year in 77, who'll win the Tour then?" And I said, "Well, nobody. Why not keep Van Impe?" Well, I said, "No, if I keep Van Impe, I need a team to support him so that he can win. But I have another rider who will probably win 3 or 4 times. I'm betting on him. And Lucien Van Impe won't win the Tour, but I need to build a team for Bernard Hinault. You know, when you have one champion and another one growing into a champion, there's trouble ahead." And he said, "That's not totally irrational." Now, I told him, "If you'd like to coach Van Impe next year, I'll give you the keys. You know, the keys are here. You can take the car." He burst out laughing and said, "No, keep the car. I'm sure you're a better driver than me."
When in 1977 this 22-year-old French guy won 2 classic Belgian races in a row, the Gand-Wevelgem, the Liège-Bastogne-Liège, well, it was a big deal. And while he was at it, the Dauphiné Libéré at the same time, I remember. There might have been a kind of campaign directed at the team then by some journalists to push Hinault to run into the Tour de France. But in the end, he didn't run, and I'm sure that was the right decision. Cyril Guimard was a great coach back then.
Well, I look back, in 77, he was already competing with the greatest runners. He ran with Merckx, with Didi Thureau, with Verbeek. He ran with Mertens. And it wasn't a coincidence that he won the Critérium du Dauphiné. The Critérium du Dauphiné in the great mountain stage. He dropped everyone with a 3- and 4-minute lead. He fell in the Col de Port descent. I remember I went to pick him up underneath. He got back up and off he went. He got up to the top of the Bastille and won the Critérium du Dauphiné in 77. And I don't think I have to spell it out. We both thought 23 and a half was old enough to attack the Tour and to attack it to win it. Everything was perfectly planned to bring me out on top in 78. There was just one small doubt. They weren't sure I could endure 21 days. The only way to find out, really, was to try the Tour of Spain. And those 21 days were what we needed for the Tour. And what's more, I went and won.
So he decided to race in the Tour de France, his first Tour de France. And here again, Hinault had won the French Championship. He wore the red, white and blue jersey, therefore, for his first Tour de France in 1978.
And the great love affair between Bernard Hinault and the Tour continues after the break.
Dans ma tête, je suis arrivé au Tour 78 pour gagner.
Well, as far as I was concerned, I was in the 1978 Tour to win. I decided to win. That's how it was, really. In my program, the key areas had been identified. The mountain wasn't a problem since I'd already done the Dauphiné and the Tour of Spain, so I knew I'd take the mountains. And I was better at racing against time than the rest of the field.
Un peu plus ma spécialité que les autres.
1978 was Bernard's first Tour. He'd already proved himself with the Dauphiné and other races, revealing himself as quite simply a fearsome competitor. As far as I was concerned, he was a favourite from the very beginning.
There are more stages this time in the Tour, which is a good thing for him. There are more time trials and 1,700 kilometers of mountain passes. I think Bernard will be more consistent on those passes than Bruyère, and he'll catch up with him before getting to Paris and make up for lost time this evening.
That image of Valence d'Argent, even though in 1978 there was the big riders' strike protesting against the split stages, transfers, etc. Bernard wasn't the leader. The other riders begged him to join the strike. He's the only one on the picture with his chin up wearing his Tour de France jersey. That's Bernard.
Arrivé à l'hôtel,
We got to the hotel at 11 p.m. No massage, no shower. We wouldn't have minded so much if we'd left the next morning at noon or 1 p.m, but we had to get up at 5 a.m. to leave at 8 to find a stage or half a stage in Valence-d'Argent. And when we got there, all of the riders were exhausted, as you might imagine. So when we left, the seniors announced a strike. They said, we're on strike, everyone's on strike. And we were near the finish line when they came over and said, you're the French champion, you have to fight for us. I said, okay, I'll do it. I was determined. And maybe that's when they started to respect me. That's sort of how I became the boss. Alpe d'Huez wasn't my best race since I lost time and Pollentier won. I can't remember who he doubled now. At the end of the evening, later after dinner, we heard the results. Pollentier was relegated, and I was in second place. So I left wearing the yellow jersey the next day.
Here he is with Bernard Hinault on his wheel. Agostinho isn't budging. Lubinin is making an effort on the wheel, in a manner of speaking. I think Bernard was off to a good start. He would have been better off, though, if he'd zoomed out here to surprise them like Pisa would have done. Of course, that's what he should have done, but he didn't, so it's over.
There was still one time trial left, though, although I surrendered up a lot of time. It wasn't good after 2.5 weeks, and I was tired. At the end, I just felt less involved, not like I'd felt at the beginning of the race. Bernard outrode me, took the jersey, and kept it all the way to Paris. Time trials, and the last great time trial on this tour. It's the longest tour I did, apart from team time trials. I was confident in the beginning for the 72 kilometre. I knew I was 14 or 18 seconds behind you, which wasn't really much when you know what happened in the first time trial that I won. That one was even longer, so I wasn't too worried. I left feeling confident, and after a dozen kilometres I'd already caught up, making up for the lost time. I was first in line, and I really felt like I was back to my normal self.
Well, there is Bernard. He's still coughing after that incredible effort. There he is with his well-deserved jersey.
I was only 23 when I won the yellow jersey on my first tour. That was my first victory, I think. I dedicate my jersey to everyone, to my team, to everyone who worked for me, to my wife and child. Well, I remember getting goosebumps the first time I rode down the Champs-Élysées, because you see all those people watching. You know you're close to the finish line and the race is almost done. You're nearly there. Just don't take any risks. You don't want to have a bad fall. You need your team members to surround you, to protect you. And the last day, certainly not many riders feel like racing anymore. So it's pretty rare to fall the last day.
So here comes Bernard Hinault. His parents are congratulating him. His mother, his father, and now Martine Hinault is going to kiss the winner. She was the one he wanted to see. Here's the yellow jersey of the Tour de France, worn by Bernard Hinault. Mr. Muniz is also coming to congratulate him.
When I got to the start line in 79, well, I knew I was there to make the double. There were time trials. I won the sprint in Pau. I won the sprint in Aulnay-sous-Bois, I think. And on the Champs-Élysées also with you to finish.
The Hinault-Zoetemelk clash was a constant in Bernard Hinault's career. In 1978, he won the Tour. Zoetemelk lost. He was second. In 1979, he did it again. And they were the two favourites once more. The Tour course was rough between Amiens and Roubaix, I remember. And Bernard, the cobblestones, they weren't his thing. He didn't like it at all. And he was pretty grumpy because of it. And an attack developed. Not with Bernard Hinault, with Zoetemelk. And I think even Bernard had a mechanical problem, but he was riding, chasing Zoetemelk, and naturally Zoetemelk gained time in Roubaix.
derrière Zoetemelk. Et naturellement, Zoetemelk lui prend du temps à Roubaix.
I was in a decent breakaway. I saw the Belgian team, Joubert, who I didn't know had a number of cyclists up front forming a border. I was in the border with Sven Nilsson. We left with 5, 6, 7 of us. I can't remember exactly how many. And on the first set of cobblestones, we split. On the second cobblestones, I then got a flat. Nilsson changed my tyre. I came back at the breakaway. I was lucky to have Nilsson with me. And I remember Bernard lost 3 minutes that day.
Well, Bernard wasn't too happy, as you can imagine. You know how he is. Well, later on in the Tour, he won 7 stages and outrageously dominated Zoetemelk and the others. But there was, and this was a constant with Bernard Hinault. How can I explain it? When he was offended or angry or unhappy, the emotion increased his desire to win by a big margin. And there were days during that Tour that he was absolutely untouchable. So I can't say whether or not it was a direct consequence of the cobblestones, which he never liked, but I think they were certainly something of a trigger.
You get ranked by team, points, time. I won the green jersey, the 2nd or 3rd mountain ranking, and Jean-René won the white jersey. It was fabulous. But what surprised me with the Badger, the leader, the champion, is that he never talked to us during a race. If he wanted to see us, he was the first in line, so I always rode up front first with the Badger. At the time, I think there were 10 of us at the start of that Tour, 10 riders team, the 10th in the Renault team in 78, 79 and 80. Getting to the Champs-Élysées is the last stage, and there was a fight between 3rd and 4th between Tourard and Kuiper. And on those hills bordering the Vallée de Chevreuse, they kept attacking each other, one after the other, because just a minimal amount of time separated the two. And finally, at one point, they stopped for a while. At the top of the Longmont hill, I think, so I took the roundabout because I was following them, which seemed logical to me. I had a 20 or 30 minute lead, so I figured I was having good time, and I continued. I left with close to a 1 minute lead, and then I heard that Zoetemelk was out and nobody went to get him, so they weren't interested anymore. I waited for him on top of the Pavé de Garde, and when we rode down to Meudon, we passed the quays and rode down onto the Champs. Bernard attacked, and I took so long to catch up. I stayed 20 to 30 meters behind. I was having a hard time catching up until at one point I did catch up, and I said, Bernard, we've seen everything now, should we stop? And Guimard comes up and says, why stop here? Go on now, ride. You're riding the Tour. So we took turns cycling around the Champs-Élysées, and we rode 8 times together. At the end, this is what I said to Bernard. You win the Tour, can I at least have the stage? And he said, no, that's not going to happen. The Champs-Élysées shows no mercy. We ride the sprint according to the regulations, and the best man wins. I said, but I'll never win against you. You go twice as fast, so you'll win both the Tour and the stage. And that's how it ended.
Meanwhile, both men side by side. Zoetemelk may have gone a bit fast, but what can he do now against Bernard Hinault diving along the barriers? And an easy win for Bernard Hinault. 2nd, Zoetemelk.
We sure had a few problems, but that's par for the course in a race. 1980, and my dream was to make the Triple Crown. I mean, I wanted the Tour of Italy, the Tour de France, and the World Championship. But the weather for the departure of that first Tour, and the one in Italy, must have had an effect on my injured knee. I waited, I worked up to the foot of the Pyrenees, and at the bottom of the Pyrenees, I said, we're going to have to stop. I just won't make it.
That night there was a ceremony, a banquet with journalists, somewhere near Po. We had a bit to drink. It was raining outside, I remember, and all of a sudden, I'll never forget this, a guy in a motorcycle outfit walks in and says, hey guys, Hinault's out. It was 11 p.m. Well, we made fun of him. Hinault is out, are you kidding? No, I'm not kidding you guys, he's out. And that's when the journalists suddenly realized what was going on. Some left to find a telephone, others drove back to their hotel, and it was true. Hinault, well, he had quit the tour. He left the hotel after dinner quietly, and now we know he went to see his friend Hubert Arb, who lived nearby. He was in too much pain. He lost the Tour de France without even riding in it.
Se réfugier chez son ami Hubert Arb, pas très loin, mais il ne pouvait plus supporter la douleur. Il a perdu le Tour de France sans avoir à le perdre sur la route.
Quand j'ai abandonné à Pau, c'était déjà prévu dans la journée.
When I quit in Pau, I decided on it that morning.
On a mis ça dans une voiture, on est passé
with Cyril, my luggage, put it all in the car. We went to Mr. Leviton's and Jacques Godet's hotel to tell them I was quitting. Well, they couldn't believe it.
Journalists are always around when things are good, but when they aren't so good, that must have been the first time Bernard avoided his responsibilities as champion.
No, he didn't avoid his responsibilities, absolutely not. Quite the contrary. Bernard didn't want to go through this kind of pain, a rider abandoning the team, showing his shame in front of everyone. He certainly didn't want it. I heard about it late at night. They came over and said, Bernard isn't riding tomorrow. I said, that's impossible. He has the yellow jersey. Why isn't he racing? He's first in the ranking. No, they said he won't be leaving. And I thought, I'll see tomorrow whether he comes to sign in or not. The next day, well, it wasn't there. It wasn't in the race either. Leviton came towards me and said, do you want to don the yellow jersey now? I said, look at the ranking. Bernard's leading, I'm second. For me, he's still the leader.
So, why won't you wear the yellow jersey?
Because Bernard had it on last night. As far as I'm concerned, he's still in the race.
And will you try to win the yellow jersey?
Well, I'll try. When you ride down the Champs-Élysées wearing that yellow jersey, it's like being in another world. There's such a big gap between winning and that second place. When you have all of the supporters, French, Dutch, and from all other nations, they're all there to see who's wearing the yellow jersey. And on the podium, when Chirac had the jersey in his hands with the Dutch president, Mr. Van Aert, that moment is exceptional.
The story of Bernard Hinault, the last Frenchman to win the Tour de France, it continues into the 1980s when we come back in just a moment.
En 81, donc départ à Nice, je gagne le prologue.
In the 1981 Tour de France, we started in Nice. I won the prologue, a round trip around the Promenade des Anglais. And at that time, I was already averaging out over 51 kilometers an hour. The guys were motivated too. They had to take a decision either to stay with the champion because they'd be sure to win something, or face him on the other side and be wiped out. That was kind of the case really for Jean René, who might have been bribed by another team. He left, he didn't get to race in the Tour de France. I didn't help him, that's for sure. I left the Badger in 1980 to become the leader with Peugeot in 81. I was the traitor who left, I suppose. He made me pay for it. He made me pay for it because I was on a breakaway in Plenet, a big day that on the Tour, and others who wanted to get back at me for leaving the team. And Bernard started out the hostilities from the moment we got going.
I put my stopwatch on in the past. We can't say it's been easy for Bernard Hinault. Bernardo has saved the situation. He's been a hero. Left as an outrider with Fernandez Martin, joined by Hinault and Fons de Volt, 20 kilometers from the finish line, riding with Bernard Hinault for the 10-kilometer climb. And then the Fédération de Breton, 5 kilometers from the peak. Well, that's how it was for Bernardo. He lost a bit more time there, 32 seconds in fact.
Well, that was a story I should have won in Plenet. My ego was telling me to finish with him. I knew I could do it. When he attacked me, I knew I didn't have much time to get to him. I went after him. When he turned around, I smiled to throw him off. And Guimard stole the flag from the captain to warn him before I caught up, because with 100 metres that he left for me, I'd catch up and support Hinault's second attack to finish beside him. He beat me, but I was there in the photo, and Guimard didn't want me in the photo since I'd quit Hinault's team.
In the 1981 Tour, Bernard Hinault was a leader, stronger than ever before. 5 stages under his belt, 20 days in yellow. That month of July responded like an echo to his other achievements, the Liège-Bastogne-Liège in the snow, the Tour of Italy, the World Championship at Sallanches, the Paris-Roubaix. The French national anthem welcomes his 3rd victory in the Tour de France.
La victoire aux Champs-Élysées quand il gagne au sprint, alors que
his victory on the Champs-Élysées when he won the sprint, and remember, he wasn't a sprinter, although while he wasn't labelled as a sprinter, he had what it took to be one, and he beat everybody in the sprint, just like that, because it was impossible to do things any differently. That at least is the impression he gave me. I mean, it had to be that way. It had to boil inside his head, and the heat went into the muscles, and that rage made him win. He shouldn't have won that day. Many other guys, faster than he was, were there, but he won on the Champs-Élysées. He won on the Champs-Élysées, and that, of course, is the stage that everybody in the Tour de France wants to win.
Et il gagne quand même aux Champs-Élysées. Et en plus, ça, c'est l'étape où il faut gagner, en fait, quoi.
Charlie
Berard came up to me and said, "Get into the wheel." And from that moment, I followed it and I flew. He brought me up and let go at 400 metres. For the 400, I said, "Come on, let's do it."
And now, watch out, make way for the green jersey, the yellow jersey, Kelly, Hinault, Kelly will be sure to be overwhelmed. Hinault's won it. Yes, first to the line, Hinault, second Bertin, third Van der Poel, fourth De Wolf. Hinault's technique in the sprint beat them all.
There aren't many cyclists lucky enough to win on the Champs-Élysées. One a year wearing yellow. There hasn't been one since, and I don't think there'll be another. Not in the near future, that's for sure.
At 28 years of age, Hinault had a terrific record, but he was far from satisfied. He kept looking for new challenges. And in 1983 came a call from destiny. A knee injury made him cancel the Tour de France. Would he ever be able to cycle again?
Hinault thinks someone tampered with his saddle between Salamanca and Avila. When he got to Madrid, Bernard also admitted that his second victory on the Tour of Spain had been the hardest of his whole career. Hinault, tall and proud, surpassed himself to crush his Iberian opponent, but the big gear ratios got the best of his right knee.
Hinault was at the finish of the Tour de France in 1983. He didn't race in the Tour due to the pain in his knee. So that day, I was meeting him in the Hinault Cafe on the Champs-Élysées to interview him. Well, I remember this interview, and I'll remember it for the rest of my life. He was hurt physically, morally. He was mortified and so angry about being hurt and not part of the race. I remember he said, "If this goes on, I'll break a bottle. I'll take a shard of glass and I'll operate on that knee myself." He was upset, of course, but and then he looked like he was about to cry out of despair and rage. The guy was incredible. What a temperament. He certainly was not soft-hearted, that's for sure. I doubt he would have gone to that extreme, but it gives you an idea of just what he was going through.
In '83, the injury came from the saddle. It wasn't at the right height. In the Tour of Spain, I took my bike, and when I got on, I said, "This isn't adjusted properly. Someone's messed around with it." No, the team was saying, I said, "Look, someone has played around with my bike here." So they gave me my spare bike, and that was at the right height. But you always want your regular bike back. I said, "Adjust it for me." And when I took it back, I said, "This still isn't right. Something still isn't right. It's at the wrong height." He said, yeah, whatever. And when I got on, I thought to myself, "Up yours." But you can't take things too far. There is a limit. But I had the feeling that I was over the limit, like when I was with Hinault. I should have stopped right away. Maybe I could have done the Tour de France, but no. I felt I had to take a holiday for 7 months in the end.
Bernard Hinault's tendonitis forced him to withdraw from the Tour de France in '83. He isolated himself in Brittany at his home in Quessoir, a big contrast to the previous and glorious race of 1982, where Hinault won his 4th Tour de France, including that Champs-Élysées stage.
My first criterium was in Calac. The inflammation came back. Every time you take a bend, you use your tendon, and that puts more pressure. I left the criterium. I had to quit. I immediately called Armand Maigret and said, "You have to cut me open. I want to know what's going on in there."
When they operated, because the medical treatment wasn't working at first, he asked for the operation in Calac during the criterium, and he said, "If you don't operate, I'll do it myself." Well, when he was angry, you had to react fast. And so, we operated. And you know, he was right, because the operation was successful.
Ce qui est vrai, donc du coup, il a été opéré et il avait raison parce que ça a bien marché.
So 8 days later, I went under the knife. Dr. Le Foll was my surgeon. He said, "Don't worry, there's nothing serious here." So that night I was sleeping, but when the anaesthetic wore off and I wasn't too groggy, he said, "We didn't touch the tendon. We took the sheath off it because it had hardened into several pieces. And as soon as I understood that the tendon was intact, I was off. They couldn't stop me."
And the career of Bernard Hinault was not finished by any means. Join us again in a couple of minutes as the story continues. Even before Bernard Hinault's injury, another danger had appeared within his very own team. Likeable but fiercely competitive. The newcomers, Laurent Fignon and the others, were 20 years old and daring.
Well, I'd been very lucky to recruit cyclists like Bernardo, like Motte, like Fignon, Greg LeMond, Pascal Jules, all of them racing cyclists who I thought had outstanding potential. A new group was arriving with a desire to make a niche for ourselves. We were hungry, we wanted to perform, and importantly, we knew we were good.
I was there when Laurent arrived with Pascal Jules. It was during the professional French championships in 1982. And I saw these two cowboys arrive wearing jeans, two Parisian kids. And opposite them, there was a Renault team that was already in search of physical expression, if you like, because the team was getting a little bit old. So it was a clash of generations. Although the age difference was only 10 years, so not a lot really, but nevertheless, there was a clash of generations of behavior.
I'm tempted to say there was almost a before 1968 culture and an after 68 culture. These people didn't have the same centres of interest, be it culture, books, cinema or music. There was a huge gap culturally between these two groups. This is what made Bernard Hinault say one day, "I feel like I no longer know my team." He was right. One or two cyclists wouldn't have had the same importance in the development of the team, but this was a new wave of cyclists arriving. There's my brother. You look at Motte or Fignon, Jules Gaillard, Barteau, a whole group. I was never against all this. There are so many races, there's something for everyone. I thought it was good. And in any case, you know that at some point you'll be out on your ear. There's a need for another to replace you.
Bernard Hinault and Cyril Guimard had joined their destinies 7 years earlier. The year 1983 marked a turning point in their relationship, though. One of them had to restart from zero, having recently undergone knee surgery, and the other knew he had new assets. Once again, the Tour de France would decide what would happen.
Bernard won the Tour of Spain in '83. He didn't win the Tour de France '83 because he wasn't there on the start line. That's because at the end of the Vuelta he was injured. We left for the Tour with two leaders, Marc Madiot and Laurent Fignon, and Laurent ended up winning.
Laurent Fignon, nothing left to say really. Bravo, the Tour de France has been good to him, and now he's winning it.
And at that point, I knew that one of them would have to leave, because that's how elite sport works. You simply can't have two winners of the Tour at the same time and on the same team and getting on.
It's a bit like a rock band with two singers. At some point, it simply doesn't work.
I remember I was lying in my hospital bed, and that's where I took the decision that I couldn't continue with Cyril. It couldn't go on like that. There was too much aggression between us. So I asked for a meeting with Hinault, and I said, there it is. You have a choice to make, Cyril or me, but it won't be both of us. Me, I can't go on like this. And, well, they kept Cyril, and I went back to square one.
What we can say is that Bernard benefited from Cyril Guimard's circle at the beginning of his career. He no doubt needed that, and he admits himself that it was useful and necessary. Then he grew up. He understood things for which he no longer needed the protection of Cyril. He wanted to break free, and that looked legitimate to me. The best proof is that he became so independent that he was frustrated, so he went to create his own team with Tapie after that knee injury. Really, he was starting over from nothing once more. At the end of the 1970s, with Cyril Guimard and his scientific method, Hinault had already cleaned up his sport, but this was nothing compared with the upheaval that was to follow. Against all expectations, he tied his destiny to that of an atypical French businessman who was rising in fame, Bernard Tapie. The Breton no longer wanted to weigh himself down with an athletic director. He also took the risk of paying his own teammates. The world was changing, and so was cycling. With Bernard Tapie and Bernard Hinault, a new era, the cashiers.
And at that point, we knew we would need at least one new trainer. So we went to see Louis O'Connor and, quite by chance, Paul Kirkley, who had also fallen out with his federation, and he knew Richard Marillier. And Richard told me, call him. Since he was available, we brought everyone together, got them in the same room, and things took off. And then we went to see Tapie for money, because that's important too. Unfortunately, it is true. You have to have money.
At the end of September, the name of Bernard Tapie came up in a special television sports program. For about a month now, the whole of France has been waiting to find out what Bernard Hinault will decide to do. Well, it's done. We've known for the past 5 minutes, and we'll play the game with you. Who are you going to race for next year?
I think I can announce good news. For one thing, I'll stay in France, and the person that I get along with so well, I think we work closely together, is Mr. Bernard Tapie.
So Bernard Tapie is a man who's used to sorting out businesses in difficulty. If it is called on him, is the Hinault business in difficulty?
I don't think I'm going to lose any sleep over this tonight. I can tell you something. that you and your fellow journalists Tuesday evening at 6:30 p.m. and there we'll discuss this in more detail and explain our plan of action.
And on the following Tuesday, in other words 48 hours later, at a luxury hotel near the Eiffel Tower, the press conference. Curiously, at press conferences for cycling at that time there'd be, what, 10, 15 journalists? Let's say it was for people in the know. But on that day, it was the Tapie phenomenon, as we found out later. And there were 100 journalists, a big, big event.
Well, Bernard Tapie had just purchased Look, the skiing company. And he was interested in developing the bike. So I said, if you make for me the automatic pedal, I'll sign. All right, we'll do it. And quickly we got to work with the engineers because it was the first such pedal. It was groundbreaking. That first year I was the only one to use it because everyone was a bit curious and a bit apprehensive of this new technology that they thought would affect their shoes. I raced the whole tour and it didn't happen. At the end of the year, we had everyone on the team use this pedal, and in '85 it was on. We saved the business in a way.
But when you hired Hinault, was this to make money?
It's because it was a pleasure for me. And at one point, if you are leading a business, you need to communicate. You can do it through commercials, or you can do this in another style of public relations, where Bernard Hinault exists. He embodies health, he embodies being young, he embodies being in good shape.
We had a budget of some 10 million francs, and since the others lived with half that budget, well, it looked a bit pretentious. We were really pushing the walls. Then we had the jersey, and that had a publicity effect, of course. Well, we felt right away that people would be talking about this team, both for its members and its setting, its outfits, and all the rest. It was on again. In 1984, La Vie Claire jersey made the headlines. Bernard Hinault putting on a great performance in the Paris-Nice, and he won the 4 days of Dunkirk. But his entire ambition was for the Tour de France, a 5th Tour win like Anquetil, like Merckx. There was one condition, defeating a young man he knew so well, Laurent Fignon.
I go into the Tour then with the intention of winning it. There's Bernard Valet with me. We go out for a training session. I tell him we'll win, and then I win the prologue. I'm thinking I'm still not too bad.
We were nervous about him. Hinault had a long Tour de France mileage behind him, didn't he? Even though Laurent had won the Tour in '83, it was Hinault who was the world reference. We left for the Tour of '84 thinking it would be difficult to beat him.
I finally have this Bernard Hinault whose potential is familiar to me. But I know that Bernard has not yet become the great Bernard Hinault. That was still to come. That was something else that we'd find out, that Fignon had not gone down a notch. He'd gone down 3 notches. It was quite a shock.
In that famous tour of 1984, the first for La Vie Claire, I witnessed, like most journalists and spectators, how Fignon dominated the race, passing Bernard without even looking at him. Fignon obviously knocked out Bernard Hinault in that climb up to Alpe d'Huez. And I think at that point, Tapie had real doubts. That's where the idea of Greg LeMond popped into his mind.
C'est là que l'idée de Greg LeMond lui passe dans la tête.
So, of course, Laurent was better than me up in the mountains. I was close by. I never let down my guard. I was on the offensive, always attacking. I thought I could give him difficulties one day when the opportunity came up.
What was extraordinary at that point? Because I think this was a great period in his life. He never admitted being defeated. Never. He attacked. He gave it his all. He was showing fantastic professionalism. He was literally working his guts out. Well, Fignon won the Tour, of course. Hinault finished in 2nd place. I think a colleague from the team summarized the situation well when he said, "Bravo, Fignon. Thank you, Hinault."
Bravo, Fignon. Merci, Hinault.
I think he knew in any case that he couldn't win the Tour. It's true that this was not even a defeat. It was a kick in the butt in a way. He didn't talk about it, but Bernard wasn't the kind of person to talk about such things. I think in his head he was ready for '85. It was already clear that he wanted revenge, which in fact he would get. I tried everything. You have to accept that someone who's stronger than you that day is ahead of you.
In '84, we all had our assets in the game, all the favourable circumstances. We won 10 stages. It's an absolute record. We've never done better in a Tour de France. We had our dream team. We were, if you like, the Real or Barcelona of that period.
Nothing could touch us. I almost felt like saying what could happen was Barteau winning the Tour.
But Fignon is not the leader of the general classification. There's Vincent Barteau in the yellow jersey, who's running, who has courage and ambition, and who is preserving an advantage of 6 minutes and 29 seconds.
It was fine. It was our team.
All we needed to do was to hop on the bike in order to win almost. It was relatively simple and easy. The following year, we were in the same situation. Fignon and myself and the Badger, well, he thrashed us. Fortunately, it's part of the beautiful story of cycling. One day you win, the next day you can take a blow from the very person you humiliated the day before. On the Champs-Élysées at the end of this Tour of '84, he did take a blow. Nevertheless, he rebuilt himself later. But coming out of the Tour, he had doubts. He had doubts because he was no longer on the podium, and the future, well, that's why he was so extraordinary. In other words, he rebuilt himself. And he went on to win the Tour again. You have to see the ambition, the work that goes into it, including work on himself to succeed in changing the course of events completely. It is absolutely extraordinary.
There wasn't a single false note in that last stage of the Tour. The riders arrived as a group on the Champs-Élysées. Hinault remained ahead, protected by his teammates. He kept the yellow jersey with no worries.
Still to come, Bernard Hinault takes on a new challenge of Greg LeMond when we come back in just a couple of minutes.
$1 million
for the transfer of Greg LeMond. In cycling, this figure has never been reached before. LeMond confirmed to us on the phone that the contract is not yet signed, but the offer was interesting.
Well, that was a story. In a hotel, there was this lady, a beautiful lady, long brown hair, like a Bond girl, just dressed in leather, all black. And then she took her helmet off, she saw me, and she came a little closer. She said to me, "Mr. LeMond?" I said, "Yes, Mr. Tapie," she said. "Mr. Tapie would like to see you now." So I said, "Okay."
Bernard Tapie quickly understood that when Fignon won the Tour ahead of Bernard Hinault, that Bernard had shown his limits back in '84, and he quickly tried to convince Greg LeMond to join him.
So, this lady, she opens the door. I remember standing there with Tapie, Hinault, and someone else in the entourage, a manager, I think. I didn't know who he was. But Tapie was the first to speak. He said to me, "Do you want to earn a lot of money?" That's the first thing he said to me. So I listened. He said, "This is the future." He said, "Me, I want for you the commercialization of pedals. And we will pay a lot of money for you to come." I was there just to hear what he said. The money he was proposing was crazy. $1 million over 3 years. 3 times more than what I was making at the time. And $1 more per medal.
On savait qu'Hinault n'allait pas faire encore 5-6 ans, je veux dire, chez les pros.
Well, we knew that Hinault would not be around for another 5 or 6 years. We knew that LeMond was recruited to make up for Hinault when he left, to have somebody around in case Hinault disappointed him on the Tour. In any case, Tapie wanted a winner, be it Hinault or LeMond. It wouldn't be a problem. It wouldn't be a problem, in fact, if LeMond had won in '85, I think. So was it a problem for Bernard Hinault, who was in a hurry, had already made it clear that he would leave the pack in a year's time? Yes, the Badger was rebuilding himself, and in the autumn he won the Grand Prix of Nations and the Tour of Lombardy. And the new luxury harness of Hinault LeMond didn't even have to take on Laurent Fignon in the Tour of 1985. In the spring, with an Achilles tendon injury, Fignon pulled out. Hinault soon got the yellow jersey, and he was beaming. But fate seemed to be against him.
I think in ¡85 I had it together. The Tour that year started off well until that fall in Saint-Étienne.
Bernard Hinault is injured. He's been injured at the finish of the 14th stage, Autran de Saint-Étienne. The diagnosis, a double fracture of the nose and a cut to the scalp. It all happened in the last 300 meters when the pack started to sprint. Hinault, Valle, Anderson, Vignon, something happened and he fell. The course of the fall remains a mystery.
There were lots of spectators there that day. I put Greg up in front. I let him take the lead. Phil Anderson, Steve and Roach couldn't get past. There were just so many people, room for just the one cyclist. So it was for second place to make sure Greg had the second. So he left, and during the sprint there was, I think, should we say, a few settling of scores? Me, I'm still convinced that I was pushed by Phil Anderson. He denies it, but unfortunately there are no pictures. It would all be different if we could go back and see.
He was suffering because he was really hurt, you know. He had problems in the Pyrenees. Le Mans saw that he was stuck a little bit, so he attempted to take off with Stephen Roach.
The goal of the team was, if Hinault has a bad day, maybe I can win the race. Maybe. But the thing for me was that when I arrived, I didn't know where he was. It was so foggy.
Hinault left behind at the summit by Stephen Roach and the others. It was one of the big pictures of this Tour of France 1985. Roach accelerated. He caused the break that we were worried about, or we were hoping for. Hinault was dropped by the two men who were behind him in the general classification. A really terrific scenario. Roach third, 6 minutes 14 seconds, but Lamont as well. Lamont, Bernard Hinault's teammate. We would discover with interest his attitude towards this blow. Monsieur Hinault. And there Köchli intervened. Köchli said, no, no, it's Bernard.
So I arrive at the bottom. Maurice Le Guillou tells me, no, you can't. I said, why are you telling me that? It was as if Hinault was just behind and I had to wait for him. So, okay, how many seconds? 40 seconds. Hinault was 18 seconds behind and catching up with me, but Hinault, each time I looked, he wasn't there. And when I crossed the line, he was still 5 minutes behind me.
Behind them, Hinault's lost ground, Roche giving it his all. Le Mans was in his way but couldn't pass him. Those were the orders.
Greg was a little disappointed because he knew he couldn't do it, but with Hinault behind, he wasn't supposed to.
Well, Le Mans can't give it a go. He's there with Roach. He turns around, and behind is the return of the green jersey pack, Sean Kelly, Phil Anderson and Chozas. A little bit further back, there is Bernard Hinault with the loyal Rutiman. Hinault owes him a lot today. Without him, he would have lost a lot. He would maybe even have lost the Tour de France.
They lied. They lied. And I know Hinault was aware of that. That's why he said, don't worry, I'll work for you if I'm the strongest. But I had nothing against Hinault in '85. It was more with Tapie and Köchli.
If, for example, Greg LeMond and Bernard Hinault were equal, which side would Bernard Tapie's heart lean towards?
It was Bernard.
That's nice for Greg LeMond.
No, but Greg has more time.
But why are you making this choice?
Simply because for Bernard, it's the last tour that he's competing in with the desire to win. The challenge is already taken, and then he'll help Greg win.
Well, in the Pyrenees, Bernard wobbled, but he clenched his teeth like never before. The day after the Tourmalet, they were in Bisque. Stephen Roach had not yet attacked. LeMond hesitated.
Hinault was dropped, but really let himself go. Me, I pushed 3 or 4 times, staying in line with him. Otherwise, he was still losing. 2 or 3 minutes more. I don't think I lost a lot. It was still okay for me. They'll have a hard time. And when you look at things the other way round, I was up there twice because there were 2 half stages. I was ahead and I said, now I'm the boss, guys.
So, a 5th jersey on the Champs-Élysées, a 5th Marseillaise for Hinault. The fall in Saint-Étienne, the broken nose, the damaged face, it all touched the hearts of the crowds and swayed them. Bernard Hinault had come back one more time.
I was left thinking, there's no doubt, I can beat him. Hinault was stronger in '86 than in '85, honestly. Hinault was really strong. When you win the Tour, you know that you're the boss. And then at the end of the Tour, I promised Greg that he would win in '86. That I would be there to help him out.
About that story, the story of I'll let you win next year. We keep hearing that, but it's always, you know how it is. It's like when you walk into a bar, the story begins like that, and in the fifth bar, it turns into something else. So, yeah, we heard about it, but we didn't pay too much attention to it, really. We just wanted to win the Tour. What we were waiting for as well was the duel between Hinault and Le Mans in 1986, because we knew that half the team was for the foreigners, half the team for the French. So that set the tone from the very start, if you know what I mean.
So Le Mans, Hinault, one of cycling's great rivalries. We continue our recollections next.
In the Tour de France of 1986, Laurent Fignon was back, but he was brought down by a fever in the Pyrenees, and we never saw a rematch of '84. So was it time for the duel between Hinault and Le Mans? Hinault had made a promise to let Le Mans win, but it was as if only Le Mans believed him. The last Tour de France of Hinault was happening in an electric atmosphere. He wanted to keep the promise that he had made, but he also said, I'll help you win the Tour, but you have to deserve it. So his terms were a little enigmatic.
I had read an article that said, we'll decide about the leader after the first time trial. I remember thinking, that's just a journalist trying to stir up a little bit of trouble and tension in the team.
If you have a budget of 25 million for a team, you're taking a risk if you focus on a single leader. It's as crazy as McLaren having a single driver or Williams having just one driver. Now, putting a team together is expensive. If you want to be at the top, you need at least two leaders. At the start, it's always like that. You have to win the Tour. There are no orders. There's nothing like we must win the Tour with Hinault or we must win it with Le Mans. We simply must win the Tour.
If the leader was to be decided by the result of the first time trial, the one in Nantes redrew the landscape. That huge day, Bernard Hinault left behind Greg LeMond, who was unlucky with a broken wheel, by 43 seconds. With the Pyrenees lying ahead, what happened to the promise?
Well, at the finish of the post stage, we didn't have as many tactics as usual. On a whim, but on a whim that never happens today, something happened. We picked up 50 meters on an intermediary sprint. We took the lead a little bit, and I was told, go on, and off I went. We took off, and then he told me, go all the way. So you don't ask questions. You don't wonder why. You just pedal and pedal. Although Le Mans is still behind. You just go.
There were several attacks. At a pit stop, everyone convened together. I was there. I resupplied, and I saw the leaderboard. I saw the panel. 3 cyclists at 3 minutes. Hinault, Delgado. And then everyone stopped. No Frenchman was pedalling. Spaniards weren't going for it. Well, I was ambushed. I looked, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6. I was going crazy. I was wearing that yellow jersey. What was I supposed to do? I made a little attack down the side. Lucio came with me. I should have done it 40 kilometers earlier. When I crossed the line, I was practically fighting. I said, okay, so this is how it's going to be now, is it?
I made him a sign like, be careful. Greg LeMond was white with rage. He didn't want to respond. And then I said, I don't know if I can continue the Tour in these conditions. Nobody knew what was going on when he took off in the Pyrenees. He said later, I took off because I was forcing the others to work. It was a little ambiguous, really. What was Le Mans thinking about? Well, we don't care. I'm saying clearly, we didn't give a damn. We had the jersey. Now he had to pedal for Hinault. And then what was he himself thinking? I think I know more or less, but what I'm saying is it wasn't our problem. The race was now set.
Hinault is a great champion, but he's also a little mischievous. I mean, he likes to play. He loves a good fight. He loves a brawl. He loves mind games. He wants to have fun. So at the beginning of the '86 Tour, the Pyrenees there, he really went for a gamble. He took off, it's true to say. I don't know whether he was thinking, is the best plan for this, for that. He took off because he saw an opportunity to do so. He had the possibility of surprising everyone, so he just did it. I think that's part of the pleasure for him. He said, well, I don't think anyone was expecting that, and that's enough for him. Of course, when you've won the Tour de France 5 times, you can't think of anything else to have fun with, but to try and win it again. But he's a man of his word, Bernard Hinault. I even think that deep inside he was a well-balanced person. But I believe that when he attacked in '86, it was just to mess around.
I thought the race was decided. Hinault would win the Tour if nothing else happened. But you're never sure what would happen with Hinault, because something did happen the very next day. There was a meeting in the morning, and everyone said to Hinault and all the teammates, the race was over. We won't play with fire, we won't take risks, we'll follow. We only have to follow. Well, it didn't happen like that at all. Hinault decided to attack.
I was coming down the Tourmalet, and I think I could claim to be a pretty good downhill racer. And I ride down, and I'm gliding. I arrive at the bottom of the Tourmalet with a lead of almost a minute.
And at that point, we looked at each other when he attacked. We thought, there are two solutions to this. He'll wake up, or he's lost his mind. And in fact, he had lost his mind.
We'll force Phil Anderson and the others to push it, and then we'll move. The whole gang, they'll try to make a comeback. They won't leave me like this.
Behind it was already every man for himself. You had Hinault, who was attacking, although he was already 4 minutes ahead. Before the other guys could react, you asked yourself questions. Already in the car, they were wondering about Hinault's adversaries. What was he doing? What do we do now? Do we push it? Do we wait? What?
So we climb Aspen, we go back down again, climb again, Périsord. In the valley, as we're going back down the Périsord, I have a crazy... I said, I'll take 5 minutes back today. When he left the lead place, it was pretty much suicide. We joined Hinault at the foot of the Super Bannière.
Well, all that effort for nothing in a sense, because Hinault is joined on the descent to Luchon by these climbers. So the last mountain pass, there's been a meeting.
We joined Hinault, and me, I was angry. I said something like, are you all right? Yeah, he didn't really respond.
I think that was the only moment of real weakness that Bernard had in his entire career, a real error. He said to himself at that point, 5 minutes is not enough. And he decided to have another go the next day. That actually is where he made an error.
If Bernard remembers at all what wisdom I tried to impart to him, Le Mans has no chance to come back and beat Bernard Hinault.
What came over him at that moment to go all out and attack? You don't know, do you? But that's what cycling is. It's what's missing today. There's no longer that panache.
What makes a champion exceptional mentally is the desire to make history. And Hinault was beaten because he wanted to make history over those 2 days in the Pyrenees. He was beaten by Le Mans because his mattress, that 5-minute advance, he had it, but it wasn't enough. This is what people want today. We're bored today with the SRMs in an attack 2 kilometres from the finish line. He had the yellow jersey, but it wasn't enough. He wanted to remake history the next day. This is what makes people love cycling. Well, if I really wanted to be that person, I would keep on pushing and I wouldn't move. I was 5 minutes ahead. I don't know how he could have bridged the gap, but a promise is a promise, and he must go all the way.
On the French side, I think we were all annoyed, but we had a jersey to defend. He was on our team, and we had the jersey to defend. We had a war to wage still.
The Pyrenees are swallowed. Now for the Alps. From Gap to the Granon mountain pass to start out. The atmosphere light within La Vie Claire team. Hinault still wearing yellow. Le Mans 32 seconds away, and their rivals far behind. Zimmermann and Miard 3 minutes back. Delgado and Herrera more than 7 minutes back. How can Hinault still keep his word? this tour decides otherwise. Hinault, pain in his knee, asked for a doctor after Vars. Hinault is suffering. The idea of abandoning the race comes to his mind for a moment, but he resists and returns to the pack.
We thought that day that Hinault might abandon the race. In fact, he didn't abandon it at all. He decided to go all the way, but it was a bad day for him. That was clear. A bad day for his teammates too. In a way, you really saw that Le Mans was the person who was needed to win the Tour. If we had only Hinault that day, we couldn't have won the Tour.
Si on a Hinault ce jour-là, on peut pas remporter le Tour.
Strange, because I got the jersey, and then the day we were in Alpe d'Huez having a team meeting at the last minute, Hinault started talking about his tactics. He would attack during the descent to set a trap for Zimmermann. We were first and second on the general classification. It's fair to say that things were said, but I don't think any of us expected this tour to pan out exactly how it was. We'd arrived at the top, and there he was, starting to make attacks. On the first curves, I took on Zimmermann. Then he asks me, can't you pedal with Zimmermann? I'm wearing the yellow jersey. I can't pedal with Zimmermann. So I told him, how can I say this on television? Please yourself.
Le Mans is strong, rapidly joining Hinault at the Croix de Fer pass. 2 men at the head of the race. It's what we've been waiting for the last 2 days. They're united to keep Zimmermann away.
2 of us made a brilliant descent all the way down. We flew down. We let him get close. We let him come in. And Greg wanted to make a run for it. I said, no, let him come. We'll just play with him a little. So he started thinking we were getting weak, and that's when we accelerated. We left him 5 minutes, nearly 6 minutes behind at the finish line. He was all alone. Tapie said, you win, but you let Hinault arrive in the lead. It's symbolic. A bit like a gift to Hinault, a bit like a tribute. Again, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I'll stay behind him. He can take the stage. In the end, the most important thing for me was to win the Tour overall. Bernard Tapie never told us you must do this, you must do that. He couldn't come in to speak with us, given he was in Richard Marillier's car, so behind us. It was just a spontaneous thing. We were 50 meters from the finish line. The 2 of us were together. The tour was finished. And there was nobody who could bother us anymore.
Hinault, Le Mans, they're finally approaching the peak. The final peak, show of force, turning into a lesson for everybody. United in effort, united in victory. Hinault, Le Mans, writing one of the most beautiful pages in history.
500 meters, I thought I wouldn't let him have both the victory and the yellow jersey. So I thought, I'm going to take the victory. At times, I regret how I ran my career. It was like a complex between 2 brothers. Even if the younger brother is stronger than the older one, there's something psychological that you can't quite bridge. You don't want to be better than your older brother in a way. I don't quite know how to explain it.
Those final kilometers up to Alpe d'Huez stay engraved forever in our collective memory. Bernard was to hold his 5 victories, as many but not more than his 2 role models, Anquetil and Merckx, but he kept his word.
If we wage a war, it'll be a royal war, and the best will win. All this in the time trial. On the eve of the time trial, I was with my wife and parents at the hotel there. Jacques Godet came down before we sat down to eat dinner, and it was very nice and charming. He said he was happy that I was wearing yellow. He said he thought it was important for an American to win the Tour de France. But he said, you have to be careful here, Greg, because there are many people who want Hinault to win still. You must be careful with your supplies, with everything you eat and you drink, and you must keep an eye on your bike. And it was a warning to me. It was a real wake-up call. And quite honestly, it scared me.
It's duel time for Bernard Hinault. Bernard Hinault, who promised to take back the yellow jersey, but it's now or never.
Yeah, I was apprehensive of losing against Hinault, but I was also scared of the atmosphere in a way. One cyclist told me he heard Hinault say he would make Le Mans 4. Fortunately, he told him, no, you can't do that. He was a former friend.
Après, il arrive, bon, ce qui s'est passé dans le.
And then everything else happened in the race, the so-called sabotaging of Le Mans' bike, which made Le Mans sleep with his bike. As a matter of fact, it's true, he slept with his bicycle. But nobody at that moment tried to sabotage Le Mans' bike. It's all part of the story. It's all part of the story, but really, nothing more than that.
Ça fait partie de l'histoire, ça fait partie de. Voilà, mais c'est tout.
Yeah, I fell, and it's my wife thinking it was sabotage, but no, I was going too fast at a turn, that's all.
Le Mans falling at the same spot that Stephen Roach went down. Remember, it all happened very quickly, and Le Mans sets off again.
I was nervous. With all the drug controls that were in place, that affected me a bit. Tappy said, don't worry, I'll take the flasks to the lab myself in my own jet. I thought, well, that's not so good. I'm sure I was the first cyclist in the drug testing unit. The water bottle was not open. I had a Kodak camera. I thought, wait, I'll do something. I opened the 2 flasks. I rinsed the glass, the 2 flasks with water, because there were nerves around me. I wanted to make sure there was no trace of anything that shouldn't have been there.
And typically the UCI then takes the lissy, or the candle, they melt it, and then they take their stamp that I can make in any town, and they put it on, and then they do the second one, A sample, B sample. So the B sample is always the one I can go test. If this is positive, I get to test this. I know I was clean, 100% clean. So this one I don't do anything with. At the very last minute, with the candle, very hot, I put my my fingerprint right on it, so if they opened the top, I would see it. And then I took photos of the whole flacon, and I wasn't positive, but I was nervous.
It was the end of the story of that fiery Tour de France that for the first time saw an American in yellow in Paris. A tour that marked Bernard Hinault, though, finishing the course and soon finishing his cycling career. In 9 years, he took part in 8 Tour de France races, won 5 of them, and finished 2 of them in 2nd place. He marked cycling history forever. Never has a champion of his rank experienced an exit as glorious.
I
remember him saying at the peak of his success, me, I'll stop when I'm 32. I don't think many people believed him at the time when he said that. Well, Bernard Hinault turned 32 and he stopped, like he said he would. It was over. He only had one idea, just one idea in his head. It was to go to the Colorado Cycling Tour. It was to go and beat Le Mans at home. As for me, I was lucky because I was part of the history of all that, because I was at that Colorado Cycling Tour too, and it was a great moment, a really great moment in cycling. Bernard Hinault knows what he wants, and he's not afraid of his words. He goes straight to the point, sometimes clashing head-on with people, but he is real, no question.
For me, it's undeniable. The biggest talent of all time is Bernard Hinault. You know when people say, oh, cycling's so hard. In general, people say it's a tough sport, like boxing or whatever. But say that to Bernard Hinault, how does he respond? It's easier than going to the factory, he'll say. Me, I had a choice, he says, between the factory and cycling. But I had to be a champion. Through all these competitions, I travelled the world, I met so many people, be they political figures, learned men, or just ordinary people. And it's been fabulous. I wish everyone had the opportunity to live the life that I have lived.